Hello and welcome to the SQL Challenge. I'm Kendra Little from SQL Workbooks. In this video, I'm going to step you through setup for the Who Made That Schema Change DDL trigger edition of the SQL Challenge. And for the setup, you need the 00-setup.sql file. In this file, we are going to create two databases. We aren't going to do any database restores. We are simply going to create them from scratch. If you have any databases that happen to be named SQL Challenge DDL Trigger Watcher or SQL Challenge DDL Trigger, this script will blow them away. We also are going to create a user named Stormy in the SQL Challenge DDL Trigger database. Now, this is a little bit unusual. We are creating a user that doesn't have a login, which is weird, but you'll see that we are using this user for testing a low permission user. So you don't actually have to create a login for this. We will be using a special way of impersonating this user to just test low permission stuff. Our setup script cleans things up. So if you already have a trigger named DDL Watcher, it will blow that away. And then we will drop with prejudice any database named SQL Challenge DDL Trigger Watcher and recreate it empty. We will then, in the SQL Challenge DDL Trigger Watcher, we'll be putting a table in there. The table is named DDL Watcher. It will be empty. And your job will be to create a trigger that is going to automatically put rows into this table. So we just go ahead and create the schema for that for you. And then we are creating another empty database, again, dropping it if it's present. This one's named SQL Challenge DDL Trigger, and then we've got the code for that low permission user. The databases will just be created in the default locations. You'll notice I'm not specifying any file locations there. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a run, and it will reset on my system because I have run this stuff before. It will go ahead and reset this. And now in my Object Explorer pane, I can see that I have both of these databases there. In the SQL Challenge DDL Trigger, I don't have any tables in that database. I do if I look in security and I look in the users there, I do have that little database user named Stormy in there. And in the DDL Trigger Watcher database, I just have one empty user table, dbo.ddl watcher. So I'm all set up there. And now let's look through the challenge script. So in this case, I am now in the Who Made That Schema Change DDL Trigger Challenge. This is 01-challenge.sql. And this simply explains your challenge for you. It's got some links to some of the documentation that may be useful for you. And there is a note, this is only suitable, like all SQL challenges, run this someplace that is unique to you. I just run these in a virtual machine on my laptop, but don't run these on any shared instances or anything other than a private test instance. So here we go. Your challenge is to create a DDL trigger named DDL Watcher. And it should record all of the following activity to that table. We created that empty table in the SQL Challenge DDL Trigger Watcher database. And what you want your DDL trigger to do is every time activity happens, every time schema changes happen, you want rows to go in there. Now, you don't have to cover every type of schema changes. I have given you a set of activity to capture information for. So in this challenge script, you want to capture these changes. And this script is rerunnable. So I can run this whole set of commands multiple times. In other words, you don't have to rerun the setup script over and over again as you're testing. You can simply run this block of commands over and again. You want the DDL trigger to capture any create table statements. You also want it to capture any alter table statements that adds a column. And if you want to go broader on any of these, that's fine, right? So this is an alter table add column. You can capture all alter table. We are now doing alter table drop constraint. So whatever you do, you want to make sure it captures drop constraint as well as drop column. You also want to make sure that it captures renames. And in the table, if you look at the schema for the DDL Watcher table, you'll notice that it has both an object name column and a new object name column. You only actually get information about the new name if you've renamed something. So this new object name column does allow null. So know that sometimes that column may be null. That's totally fine, but you do want to capture rename events, and then you also want to capture drop table events. So when you're setting up your DDL trigger, you just want to make sure that each of these commands, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 commands in here. To make sure that all 6 of these log activity to that table. For the purposes of this exercise, they are the only 6 commands you need to worry about. Now there is a final round, right? So up here is the set of commands you want to track. This final round is designed to be, it's the exact same set of commands, but it's a final test because these are executed as the low permission user Stormy. Now, you don't need the DDL trigger to capture the exec as user, right? That's not a schema change. The exec as user here is designed to allow you to say, okay, what if a user who only has permission in the SQLChallenge DDL trigger database, right? We are recording information to the watcher database, but we need to capture this information if it happens in the trigger database. And we need to capture that information even if it's run by a low permission user who doesn't have any permissions to the watcher database. That's the key here is Stormy only has permissions to the DDL user database, and you can't give them permission to the watcher database. That's not the intent. So we are going to execute as Stormy, and then this next command is just to show you, yes, we are executing as Stormy. I have said exec as, my username is now Stormy. I have a weird login-less user, so S username doesn't return an actual login that makes any sense because I'm just like this weird orphan user in this database, but I only have permissions to this database because I've run this command. Stormy, if we run these commands, Stormy does have permissions to create table, to alter table, to do all of this stuff in the context of the DDL trigger database, but Stormy's permissions end there. So these commands do succeed before I've set up a DDL trigger. Your final challenge here is to make sure that your DDL trigger still works with this low permission user who doesn't have any permissions in DDL trigger watcher. Spoiler, this is one of those gotchas that you have to make sure that you handle in your DDL trigger so that you don't accidentally mess things up based on permissions. That's why we're testing it. At the end of this script here, I have a revert. And the revert reverts that exec as user command. So now after I do the revert, when I select my username, okay, now I'm back to running as me. In the database context I'm in, I'm running as DBO. My system username is derp/Kendar there. So that just is the final test for your DDL trigger. You want your DDL trigger to not just work for high permission users, but to also work for low permission users. So the way I would do this is I would iterate on and make sure the first set of commands get that working with your DDL trigger first, and then tackle the security problem. Now, in terms of fixing this, if you hit a problem with the security problems, you can change permissions. I don't want to say that you can't change permissions at all. You absolutely can change permissions, but the thing I don't want you to do is I don't want you to solve this problem by making Stormy super powerful. So you want that Stormy account to still have just low permission stuff. You may make other changes. You may make changes overall to the permissions on the trigger watcher database itself, right? But you don't want the changes to be specific to that single low permission user. You want a solution that will work for each user who may be low permissions users, right? So in other words, you don't want the solution to be make everyone a sysadmin for everything on the instance. That's not it. We don't want to have everyone need to have sysadmin permissions. We do want the trigger to work for even low permission users. So you can absolutely change permissions in the trigger watcher database, but it just shouldn't be a change that's specific to Stormy. All right, thanks folks, and I'll see you in the next video for a sample solution.